Feel fun.
Hello and welcome. I'm here with my very good friend and mentor, Jason Reynolds, who is an absolute legend. He's an absolute gun when it comes to, well, I would say most understandings around the nature of life, performance, business, spiritual understandings, and just understandings of life. So I've got Jason on the call today to explore some deeper questions about, I guess you would say, exploring truth and exploring how that relates to us. So, Jace, I'm excited to have you on the call. Thank you for making yourself available. I'm looking forward to diving deep into some really powerful topics.
Thanks, mate. Thanks, Chriso. Yeah, I'm not sure if I'll live up to the introduction, but let's see how we go. Have a bit of fun along the way.
I'm sure you will, mate. I'm sure you will. So we have conversations like this on a weekly basis, but I'd love to ask a couple of deeper questions from the point of view of really I guess a big frame here is how do we know what's actually true? Because there's our own subjective experience, and then there's theoretically a reality outside of the human experience that theoretically exists, where would be I guess you'd say an ultimate truth versus a subjective truth. So that's kind of the frame that I'm looking at exploring today. But I've got a couple of questions. I'll just fire a couple of questions at. We'll fire quite a few questions, and we'll just sort of get the Q&A going. So the first one is the idea of connection, the idea of being connected to something through something, and actually getting divine wisdom flowing through us from a higher source, from a higher self, from a spirit, from a soul, from the universe. For a lot of my life, I don't know, for a lot of people watching, the question that rises, well, how do I know what am I connected to? We might have fleeting moments of feeling like euphoria or connection, but how do we actually know that connection to a higher source of wisdom actually exists, that can actually flow through us, distinct from just rehashing experiences or memories or mind-based experiences? How do we know that connection to something higher than ourselves actually exists at all?
Probably the great question to start with, but probably the best thing is, how do we equally know that we're not? So for me, when we start to look at what is the truth, the only truth that I understand is that I don't know. And it's from an understanding that there's so many, unanswered questions. There's a lot of great insight. There's a lot of great wisdom from what exists around us now, through history, through time, through teachers. But ultimately, we don't know. And my understanding is that we create the greatest amount of freedom in our lives to the degree that we can embrace that. To the degree that we can embrace I don't know with a sense of adventure, a sense of curiosity. But it's to understand that that sense of adventure and curiosity is very much determined by our ability to be able to navigate the very unknown in our own life, to become independent of what we've been taught, what we've been shown, and to develop a communication that exists within ourselves. Now, going back to, I suppose, the primary question of connection, we're always connected to something. The issue is that we don't really know what that something is. So I would say, in my own understanding, that life is chaotic. Life is full of adversity. It's full of uncertainty. For most of us, we're sitting there trying to control that, trying to know that, trying to have an opinion or an explanation of all of this. Maybe we're not meant to have an explanation. Maybe the explanations that we create are only for other people. The very nature of our own connection comes from, first, for my experience, the acceptance that there is chaos. And to me, chaos is just unorganized potential, unorganized energy. It's at this particular point, there's so many opportunities available to me that at this particular point in the state of chaos, I have yet to make a choice on which path I'm going to head, which direction I am going to take. And the issue is with that is it comes to something called discernment, which is how often and how confidently I can say no to those things that look valuable to me. And this is where people get caught. because what they end up looking for is not making a decision. They'll wait and see what happens. Now, I just consider this for all of us, and it's the same scenario where we have these things called ideas, inspirations, insights that appear seemingly like an explosion within us that overtakes our very attention as far as what is now possible. And when we become very aware of that idea in that moment, we become enlivened. We become engaged. It's this uplifting that automatically occurs just by this momentary thought that entered our space. Now, in that very moment, we seem and feel like we're invincible, that what we're about to do has no opposition. It can only succeed. It's going to be the greatest thing that has ever been shown to anyone in all of their life. Now, we have an option at that particular point to take action, to express that, to follow that, to trust that without knowing. Because we can't know. We don't know where that's going to head. We can have a feeling and an insight of what it may be, but the next part is to put that into action and to move forward through that. But for most of us, we become uncertain at that stage. And what we start to do is we start to think. Now, I like to keep things simple, and thinking to me is just the opposite of taking action. We only think about things when we don't know how to action and when we don't know how to move through them. So when we have this idea and we're not prepared to act upon it because we need more evidence, we need more proof, we need more things to make sure that we're right and we're not making a mistake and we're going to be okay. So as we go looking for all that evidence, thinking, confusion, distraction, whatever you want to call it, the simple truth is we're not taking action, we're not moving forward. And what we start to do is gather evidence that justifies the decision that we've made to not take action. So we find someone who says, no, I tried that, it didn't work. Yeah, no, it only works in these particular conditions. You need these particular skills. And what we do is we gather so much evidence, we start to realize that the season's not right, that I don't have enough money, that it could go wrong, and it might affect my relationship with my partner, with my children if I was to do this. And we gather so much evidence to justify to the degree of not taking action on that inspiration that came to us. And within that, we remain consistently in the chaos as we become fed to by some outside source, starting to dull the very upwelling within us. We start to dull that and become focused upon the outside. Because an idea is when we start to bring our attention, when we start to bring our insight internally, when we start to release ourselves from the ideas and the rules of what it is to get it right or wrong. So when we're sitting there in this space, not taking action, what happens for most of us is eventually we get to a point where we don't have to take action, where we don't have to change things, where we can play it safe, where we only change because we have to, because the conditions are now such that we have to move in this direction. We say to ourselves, we don't have a choice. So we stay in chaos long enough and manage chaos long enough because we're so familiar with chaos. We're so used to chaos. But it's just, the fact is when we're dealing with chaos and adversity and confusion, we're so used to staying stuck in it. What we're not aware of is how to move through it because we're so used to, as a reaction to it, to think. And that is in complete service to the decision that we have made, sometimes consciously, but more often unconsciously, to not act, to not express, to be the individuality and the expression of that, of ourselves. So as we're sitting there, we eventually get to a point where we make a decision when there's only one door that's open. Imagine when that idea first comes, the space around you is undefined. But then as we start to give it form, we start to create structure around it, what it looks like. And then we start to create doors and we start to close those doors as we get told by others because we stop trusting ourselves. And eventually there's one door open. And what we say to ourselves, oh, well, I had to. I had no other choice. And that's where people live most of their life from. They think that they were forced to, but instead they were changed by their environment because they're a product of their environment because they value being accepted by others before being accepted by themselves. They start to believe in their own nature of being a victim to what's going on rather than being a creator of what's going on. Now, this is all easy to say, but it takes a lot for us to be able to recognize our own limitations without judging ourselves. In order to do that, this is the very nature of connection. Like to be outside of that space, we have to actually achieve something, but to achieve it, we have to go through that space. So it's kind of a conundrum to actually get to what we need in order to deal with what we are currently experiencing. We have to confront the very thing that we fear, which is the unknown. We have to accept that we're going to make mistakes. We have to accept we're going to fall over. For me in life, all we have to learn is how we get back up after we fall over, because we will fall over. So chaos is the beginning, but for many of us, as we move towards a connected state, and for what you mentioned before about this wisdom, this higher intelligence, this higher self, this Brahman, this God, this thing outside of us. Some call it the universe. For me, the biggest misconception is that it is outside of us, that it is beyond us. I refer to this in my own self as the what, because it's undefined, it's unknown. I'm not going to buy into other people's perspectives. As a point of teaching, I use most commonly the word higher self, but centralize that focus internally. It's for us to discover what we are, and to do that, we need to get firstly beyond the chaos into a state of ease. Now, there's so many ways we can do this. For some people, it's as simple as exercising. For some people, it's writing. For other people, it exists in many, many different ways. But the truth of getting to a state of ease is where we can start to accept that around us there is adversity, there is challenge. And we recognize that, but we're not influenced by it. We might not like it, but we're aware of it. We're at ease. It's not, our environment is not taking up our attention. We're aware of the challenges, the trauma, the pitfalls that exist around us. As equally, we're aware of the opportunities that exist, and we're in a state of balance with what's going on around us. We're at presence with ourselves. We have released, found real ease in our own space. And it's from that particular point that we can find connection. But I would say the thing about connection is that, and probably the greatest misunderstandings in the New Age and spiritual circles, is that connection is some enlightened space. You've been connected to your own self, which is why people rarely get to this particular point, I believe, is one of the most vulnerable, one of the most compromising places that we can be living in this existence. Because in doing so, we become solely reliant upon ourselves, and we release all of the securities that we've maintained in the life around us, as to how to make money, as our job, as our life, as our parents, as our guides, as whatever it may be, everything that we've taken on to remain secure, we have to let go of in a state of connection. Some of us connect to ascended masters because we can believe in that more than ourselves. Some of us connect to spiritual deities because, again, we can believe in that more than ourselves. It's very rare for an individual, in my experience, to get to a point where they truly develop a foundation within themselves before getting to that state of connection to really understand the gravity and the significance of what they're connecting to. You know, it's like everything. If we want to build a significant house, if we want to build a significant structure, we need a strong foundation. And if we stop focusing on building the house, but developing and nurturing the foundation, we can build a house that's going to withstand any levels of adversity. And that's the issue for most of us through our own ego and through our own identity, is we're doing things to impress others, to show others what our capacity and our capability is, rather than coming to understand what it is that we are. Not who we are, but what it is that we are, and our own capacities to recognize that comes down to our ability to be humble, in my eyes, to accept that we don't know. As soon as we can do that, I mean, try it in an argument with someone else, and you know, you see the argument inflaming in a person. And if you're able just to release yourself and say, you know what, I don't know, but let's start looking. I mean, I remember as a kid, I was shattered at one stage when I sort of understood the idea of exploration and boats traveling around the world, and then, you know, having this sense that everything had been explored, because that's all I wanted to do. I wanted to go and see the earth, and I wanted to travel, and I wanted to create and explore new things. And I suppose what drove me to discovering something within me that I have access to, that I'm far from understanding. I understand some of the principles of it, but it's a scratch upon a scratch. It's definitely not a true understanding. So for me, becoming connected and to sit on the sidelines, as some of us do, to suggest that I'm now fifth dimensional, or I'm reaching ascension in a range of different areas, I would challenge those people to really be able to demonstrate and understand themselves in their very own operation within the existence that they currently find themselves, rather than trying to escape this existence. Instead, to be masterful within it. Life is required as an expression, and it's an expression that we can come to through our own connection, when we can cultivate and not just get there, because we all have moments of inspiration, but the whole nature of connection is about, yes, can I get there, but can I maintain it? And I would suggest for many of us, which is, yes, I can connect to this greater sense, this essence that may exist within me. But can I also willingly connect to the thing that opposes me, to my ego, and to everyone else, and to the most demonic, the most evil, the most deconstructive energy? Am I able to choose to connect to that? And am I able to, in my own certainty, be able to maintain that without becoming influenced by it? Because that's when we start to recognize a level of mastery beyond the ideas of some new age spirituality that's about chasing joy and bliss and feeling good, without ever being able to confront the very darkness that exists within all of us. And so, I mean, without getting sidetracked, but I just feel something, it's very much what, you know, there's a real challenge for a lot of people to consider things like cognitive dissonance, to consider conspiracy theories, and the sinister nature of people, and the fact that other people may not have their best interest at heart. But the very nature of finding ourselves is about putting yourself first above everyone else, everything else. To be truly authentic is to be able to live in your own space and to prioritize yourself. And then what you end up giving and loving and expressing to others comes from you effortlessly. It's not an effort, it's not a role, it's not a reaction because someone did something, or it's now time to be compassionate, or someone's sad. It's the fact that you're always that way because you're fulfilled within your own self, and that requires you to focus upon you. But the thing is that I understand, in going through that and confronting your own darkness, you will recognize how sinister, how deceitful you really are. And not that that is your truth, but what you have taken on as an individual. And for an individual to be able to see that within themselves, not judge themselves, but be able to move through it, is where they start to find real freedom. To be able to accept the most grave and grievous and let's even say disgusting things that we have judged before, and see them within us. But to come to accept and love them as a part of what we are. Not to try to escape them, but to understand them. And that's where, and upon that type of foundation, that we can find our own truth. I'm not saying it's easy, but what I'm saying is it's much more simple than what we've been led to believe.
Yeah. And to go, I guess, a step further there in terms of establishing, you know, there's a lot of talk in, I guess you'd say, the spiritual community or in spiritual movements. There's a lot of talk about soul connection, connection to source, connection to entities, angels, all that sort of thing. What's your take on what we should be connecting to and what actually exists to be connected to? For example, I'd love to know your take on the difference between, how do you distinguish the difference between the highest truth? The word I would probably use for that would be source energy, just the absolute fabric, the foundational element of what constitutes the structure of what holds reality together. I would call that probably source energy. And then there might be layers of entities or layers of things in between there, descending down to the physical level, what we might connect to. So I'd love to know, is there a distinction between source versus soul versus spirit? What's your take on that?
Yeah, I'd say, of course there is, but it's from the individual's perspective. And I'm sure that, like, there's people that want to gain a greater place to look, but to me, I try to keep it simple as much as I can, but I suppose that's from my perspective. I looked, and I suppose it's what's come into my attention, and I would suggest that my understanding is definitely not the understanding for everyone else, but if it assists and helps, you know, great. But it may just be the very thing that makes them understand what's not true to them. And great. And that's why I encourage people to be polarizing, to be completely themselves at every moment of life, because you can provide the greatest insight to others by being the very thing that opposes it. and I would even suggest that as a thing that our teachers do not dress the same that we do. Our teachers do not live the same way that we do. Our teachers do not like, think, or act the same way that we do. Our teachers are the things that we are opposed to most, the things that we are yet to accept and understand. And when we can find enough love in ourselves to be able to see truth in the very thing that we're avoiding, then we can start to find what a truth is to us and start to look at words like soul. But for me, it's a simple approach of mastering this existence. What exists beyond it is not my interest. What exists even beyond this plane that we're in, whether this world is round or flat, whether there's a space or a galaxy outside of it, to me is irrelevant. It's a distraction. It might be interesting and it might be intriguing around the campfire, but no one knows what exists beyond there. And we don't need to do much looking into that. But for me, the sun is the one thing that I look back to that if it didn't exist, there'd be a significant problem. There'd be a significant challenge. And, when we ingest food, the nutrients we're ingesting come from the sun. When we look to increase, and especially in these times, people are concerned, suddenly concerned about their ability to fight off conditions or viruses as such. But the sun is our greatest source of developing our own health and immunity. Our ability to be able to see what exists around us is centralized around that, and it's a great source of life. Now, my understanding that the soul, and words change over time and they become used for benefit or for manipulation, however you want to look at it. But I believe that within us is our own soul, our own sun. And that is maybe a representation, it may be connected to every other being that exists on this particular planet. Imagine if we are, as individuals, have the capacity and we are in constant connection with every single other living being on this planet. And when we elevate and when we feel growth is when someone else releases from the need to be a part of that connection. Rather than this great coming together, imagine that we feel enlightened, and the word enlightened, as another person provides an example to us as they set themselves free by becoming true to themselves and be able to maintain their own source of life by bringing attention to themselves, that they crack the code that the very thing that keeps us alive is our own attention upon ourselves. It causes us, yes, to make decisions about food and environment and life, but we need to come very clear on what it is that we are so we can understand what it is that we need outside of anyone else's opinion in order to most serve ourselves. And once we can do that, we then release ourselves to start to find our own truth beyond the connection, the matrix, or whatever you may want to call it. But for me, the more attention that we place upon our own self, the more we can listen to, the more we can hear. And from that, the more we can act. And as we place our attention upon ourselves, we create and cultivate something called self-belief. And self-belief is very much about our ability to be able to act in places that we've never acted before. It is the fuel that moves us through the unknown. It is the thing that comforts us when we fall over and we make a mistake, that we're able to laugh at ourselves. It's the thing that allows us to keep going and keep creating and keep exploring beyond what we currently know. I mean, children are so often looked at as children, as these little things. But children ask questions and they listen to the answers. They talk about children being sponges. Children aren't sponges. They're just not full of the crap that we have taken on that we don't know how to release and let go of. And one of the greatest crises within our soul, or whatever we want to call that, is that we have covered it over, taken on beliefs, ideals, uncertainties, because we don't have self-belief. You see, beliefs and perspectives and ideals that we hang on to exist because we don't have self-belief. We either have belief or a belief in something, in the way that it operates or is, based upon a previous experience of the past, in the way we've observed it or what someone that we've trusted has told us, maybe a parent, maybe a teacher. But in self-belief, we allow ourselves to be present to the moment, and we can see exactly what's occurring at that particular point and let go of the way that we used to have it. We let go of judgment, we let go of blame, we let go of anything that was based upon something that happened prior to now. We don't need plans, we don't need goals, because we become creative and innovative in the moment, in the trust that, fuck, we're probably going to make a mistake, but we're only going to fail if we stop. And if we have self-belief, we're going to continue to keep going. Now, this is where spirituality is confused, all these basic fundamentals that exist and are obvious to each of us. So we don't need to discover what the soul is. I mean, and it doesn't really matter scientifically whether we have a part of atoms in us from the sun, from the star systems, whether our immune system has 15 different areas of operation and whether it reacts to and responds to certain things or ingredients. All of that ultimately is irrelevant. Because if we trust in the very state of being able to be integrated, and what I look at there is the nature of the physical and the energetic coming together as one, when we are able to do that, it demonstrates a level of integration. And when we can maintain that integration, who gives a fuck what our immune system is doing? What happens outside it as well? Because we are finding ourselves in that particular moment, and we can observe that from a space of our own truth. You see, when we are separated physically and energetically, when that is not operating singularly as one, we create something called the mind, which is an observation of things and a recording of things outside of our own self. And as we're observing it from a disconnected or separated state, what happens is we take on and we hold on to information because we hold on to the things that we don't understand. But when we are integrated, we can observe and not take on. We can be present, we can evolve, we can be fluent, and we can move without the restrictions or rules that we've created about a previous belief or idea. And the very nature of that is so simple. If we can come to bring both of those two things together, we can start to create something very significant. But it's not just about getting there, it's about maintaining it. And it doesn't really matter whether we call it a soul or a soul, a soul or a soul, or whether we call it, you know, a higher being, or whether it's from a certain star system or not. At this particular point, it's about first coming to be able to maintain our own space. And this is what, you know, for many of us, why pharmaceutical companies, there's nothing wrong with them in my eyes, but they exist because we require temporary solutions. People want to demonize all of these corporations and ideas, but the simple fact is they're not connecting to and maintaining their own level of investment. They're not investing. They're outsourcing all of their needs, all of their wants. They're looking for experts, they're looking for information, and they fall into this hypnotism, which is, I only just wrote something about this today, which is people do not make a separation between listening to others and making decisions while listening to others. Because when we make decisions whilst we are listening to others, that's hypnotism. That's when we are foregoing what we are aware of within our own selves based upon what someone else is telling us. And I hope no one is doing it at the moment, that the very nature of this is to be able to go away and consider what of this is relevant to me, and then whatever is relevant to me, that is my intelligence, and that's now what I can act upon and how I'm going to improve and take one thing away and move forward from here. But if I can't do that, there's the very problem. There's the separation. There's the mind trying to make sense of, trying to explain it so that I can elevate myself in front of others by telling them a story of what it is that I know, rather than studying the immune system, rather than becoming present to all forms of science, which is just an observation and an opinion of someone else who is investing their time to do so, which can bring about great awareness. But a whole range of information becomes insignificant and irrelevant and little more than entertainment when we can come to a particular point of integrating ourselves. And to me, that's why, yes, the soul and all the other conversations around it are great, but the words don't really mean much except for an identifier and a passing on of information to allow others to find their freedom in their way of achieving that.
Yeah. And I'll just touch on that as well, because another concept that's closely related to that would be things like past lives. And, there's a lot of distraction that can get created from belief in past lives, and is that relevant, and connecting to past lives, or connecting to going to see psychics or intuitives and finding out, what happened in my past life, or what's going to happen in the next life. What's your perspective on how relevant any of that realm, if it exists, should we be actually connecting to?
Yeah, I look, who am I to say whether it exists or not? I mean, I know in my life I've been exposed to it, years ago through kinesiology and other forms of that. And look, I mean, I've looked at Scientology, I've looked at religion, I've spoken tongues, I've done all sorts of things, because of nature for me is don't knock it until you've tried it, or at least understand, give an opportunity to understand it. And, past lives, whatever it is that brings someone a greater degree of awareness and freedom within their own selves. My suggestion is that there is so much information. There are so many insights, there's so many teachers, there's so many opportunities and so many perspectives. And we are trying to make the people teaching us responsible, the providers of information responsible, because they manipulated me, because they coerced me, because they did wrong by me, because they told me they were going to do something, but they didn't. We need to get past this whole nature of victims. And within our own selves, we need to develop our own capacity to be able to rise above that. So if we can do that, we can identify for our own selves, like someone sitting and eating spinach and talking about it as a superfood, is now someone else talking about Inca berries as a superfood, and whatever else someone wants to market and call a superfood. I mean, it seems like everything's super. We have super moons every month at the moment. It's kind of, language has become obsolete in a number of ways, but the very nature of past lives, it comes down to our ability to be able to discern whether that berry is good for us or not. And if we could sit in front of our partner or our child, or our teacher, and they tell us that this nutrient is the greatest nutrient that you will ever find, and it will change your life. I had this condition the same as you, and it has changed my life. Now, what most people do is they use their bodies as a testing ground. They allow their level of ignorance, which is their inability to be able to discern information as its relevance, for them to turn that information into intelligence. That's a big confusion that we maintain. Information is just other people's opinions. It's noise that we don't act upon. Intelligence is the information that we identify as relevant to us, that we can act upon. So if we can discern whether past lives are good for us or not, or they're going to provide us with some level of enlightenment or not, that's up to the individual. This is not where we've become so disempowered, where we are waiting for some icon or some celebrity that we've created to tell us what the right thing is to do. To want to come to a mentor to have them make decisions for them. I mean, people, as we're talking about before about the pharmacy, people want a quick fix. They've demanded this type of thing. They've demanded people to make decisions from the corporations and pharmaceuticals, and these type of things exist because we are not making decisions and discerning ourselves. So it's the same thing here that exists with past lives. I think in my experience, I've got a lot of wisdom from them, and I've felt, significant pains that I've had in my body, like a shoulder that I just could not get rid of. Now, I mean, and try and explain this that to someone who is unaware of it is only going to laugh at it and bring it down because they don't understand it. And that's nearly a compliment to me these days. Times before, I would have been scared to raise it or even talk out loud. But I had a shoulder pain that when I was a kid, I used to run, and it used to kill me, and therefore just didn't enjoy running. Only about 10 years ago, through an awareness coming to me, not a common practice to go into past lives, it came to me, and I regressed and looked back into that in my own space, and I saw myself being killed and a large spear going through. And it was vivid, it was clear, and I was doing it in my own space. It didn't take long, but in the releasing and the understanding of what that was and giving it attention, which is the key ingredient, giving it attention to the point of understanding it, like everything, it just released. Now, I'm not sitting here trying to put together and join the dots to say this is the way that life works. That's the way it worked for me. And that's what I'm suggesting. Forget about practices, forget about modalities. Modalities are, to me, are a greater confusion than anything else. But with this caveat in place, until we can define and determine our own space, then from there, we're not going to be manipulated by anyone else's teaching. We can go into it from a place of our own responsibility and certainty to be able to listen to what is relevant to us. We've got to take more responsibility for ourselves, no matter what that is. Whether it's a past life, whether it's a soul, whether it's joining a cult and being told that we're all going to burn here because this is the very nature of a meteor is about to hit this earth and we're the enlightened ones. Look, we live in a life these days where there's social warriors that are out there wanting to fix everyone else's lives, because the very fact is they're not prepared to most often confront their own. For me, it's about living by example and allowing ourselves to be considering and listening to and asking into our own delusion every single day, because it's there. Our insanity is right there. To be able to listen to a voice in our head and to be guided by it, it's bordering on crazy. And it's the thing that keeps people fearful of going into it. But it is also, ironically, the thing that will give you the most amount of freedom. But only if you've allowed yourself to confront the very fears that stopped you from moving forward in the first place, which is, let's get to the basis of life. Life is simply about moving forward. There is nothing more significant or great to it. And how we move forward, when we move forward, and what we move forward to is our own choice. And that is defined by whatever level and foundation we want to create in our life to build upon. And if that's just a book we once read or what my parents once told me, well, that's going to determine the height of what it is that you build. So if you want to build something significant, develop a greater foundation and a level of certainty. And here's my measure on this is, your understanding should be such that you would need to die, and it would be something that you'd have to die before you shared it with your children, that it was so clear, so certain, so clarified within you what it is that you understood, that it was imperative that you shared it with your children, that it was imperative that they understood it so that they could find their own truth, not be indoctrinated by yours and follow your beliefs because you're a practicing Christian or a Muslim or whatever it may be, that they should be as well. It's that ability and that scope to be able to have people so independent that we build a real strength of a community.
Yeah. Well, the takeaway I'm getting from that is really our own understanding of truth really comes down to what's relevant to us, and it can never be a one size fits all. It's going to be relevant to the individual in whatever way makes sense for them.
For sure. I mean, look, the wars of this world are created on this delusion that there's a common truth. There is no common truth. There might be common conversations, but look, even if you and I were both the most precisely aware of some divine order, and we agreed and we knew all the principles, we even created them and we brought them together, and our particular interaction is going to be different from each other. The way we express it, the way we do it will be different to each other. The strength of what we've created will be based upon our ability to accept how different each of us are. It's not about being the same. If we're all the same, we'll be obsolete. And it's the whole thing in the nature of life and what's going on at the moment is everyone wants to agree and convince everyone else that they're right, and not realizing it's the very thing that undoes the fabric of their own existence. So, this is a big part of it. For me, it's our love, which I always say it's not to do with the similarities, the same songs and places that we went to and the way we dress and the things that we like. Our love is determined by the degree at which we can accept the differences in other people and accept them. because that's going to be the way we accept ourselves. We're free in all the differences, the ugliness, the judgments that we've been holding on to, that we learn to accept them and see them as a very strength in our own life. Sorry to butt in there.
No, that's great. That's great. It's I guess an extension of that. The question I'd like to ask you next is, when we're contemplating the amount of influence that we have in our lives, okay, there's various different philosophies or ideas that have been spoken about that I'd love to get your take on. One of those is this nature of sovereignty and free will. Like, do we actually have free will, or are we just born into this matrix where we're given the illusion of thought that's passing through our awareness that makes us think that we have some kind of control, that makes us think that we're in some kind of virtual reality like experience? So I'd love to know your take on how much influence do we actually have? Is this experience predetermined? Is there a source greater than ourselves that's actually unfolding, and we're just the manifestation? And the contents of our awareness make it look like we think like we're in control, but actually there's much grander forces that are unfolding through us, and we are the effect, we are not the cause. So I'd love to know, what's your take on free will versus predeterminism?
I go back to the very first thing we've said, is that I don't know. And that's the place to start everything. For me, that's where real freedom begins, is to the degree. Now, and look, it's, you know, I've been lucky enough to work with or collaborate with people that are the best in their field internationally. And one thing that I noticed with some of those people is how they were not competing against others. They were only looking to explore themselves. That, you know, if the greatest tennis player in the world who was identified as having the best forehand in the world had their own awareness, or was told by someone else around them that they needed to improve their forehand, the speed at which they could accept and understand that and act upon it is what determines their growth and their ability to discover something else within them, that there's not some limit that they've now reached because they've beat everyone else. So for each of us to be able to grow, we have to be able to let go of what we know. So free will comes from a particular point of our ability to maintain our attention upon ourselves and listen to our own selves by developing and cultivating over a period of time the releasing and letting go of all the other voices that we have within us. Now, we all know that we have these voices, because when we sit in our own silence and space and we go to make a decision, we don't just make that decision. We suddenly hear our mum's voice. We suddenly hear what our dad would say, what our friend would say, the person who'd be offended, maybe our partner or our kid. We start to hear and we start to recognize all those voices. And sometimes it's one voice, you know, emasculating or feminizing all of those voices. The thing is, the only way that we can demonstrate free will in our own life is to take action, is to express ourselves. And to understand this, action can be meditating. Action can be silence, sitting still, as much as it can be creating an empire to drill oil from the world, from the earth, and pollute and do whatever it may be. To judge that and misunderstand that as because it doesn't fit in your own ideals, that's where you start to lose your free will, because you start to judge and suggest to others what's right. But the very nature of the contrast that exists from other people is what allows us to recognize our own truth. You see, for me, I don't buy into the news, because I don't feel I need the news to determine my life. I don't complain about it either. I don't see the media as scoundrels or as scurrilous or, you know, as pushed by some agenda. So what if they are? They only become infected by that if I become attentive to them. You know, for all of us, what we're doing is we're fighting against and we're opposing what other people say, and we're finding our own truth by the definition of other people's choices. And we don't realize that in agreement with someone, we're reacting to someone. But we try to, yeah, you know, we're going to get this, we're going to do this, and as a world, we're going to overcome other people by making others wrong. And as if there's some sort of righteousness in being conscious, in being spiritual. I mean, to me, one thing I became really aware of many years ago is the person sitting on the hill that's dressed in a particular way, that practices, deep, maybe religious or non-denominational practices, that finds beauty in everything in nature, that is as thoughtful to the fly as it is to the whale, to other people and their concerns as well, is no more spiritual than the person who's the head of BP that happened to just pollute the oceans. These particular people have their own expression that allows the contrast for the others. Some people will be so ingrained and so angry at what these people have done. But it's interesting that they fight those causes. Like climate change, I mean, one of the greatest distractions that exists. I mean, climate change doesn't exist in my life. I mean, we don't need to look too far to recognize the significance of what it is that we're living in. When we start to see the limits of it, we start to think we need to protect it. There's nothing that needs to be in protection. We are, as individuals, interrupting, let alone our own being and our own divinity, we're interrupting the very environment that sits around us. I mean, for the very nature of a cold coming upon us, 2 to 3 days later, that cold is gone and we have created a greater level of resilience. For most people these days, sadly, and it's probably becoming less and less, is that they look for something that they can take to dehydrate them, to stop the very process of what's going on in their body, which is just detoxing and letting go, which is what it's trying to do, to find health. But ironically, we stop that because we need it to be quicker and one day and it needs to be done. We need to feel that something's happening, not trust in something's happening. We become techno-driven. Now, our own free will is very much found, and this is, for me, it's a really simple equation. You hear these, look, I don't want to say names, but there's, leaders out there and thought leaders out there that, occasionally put up things that, get toxic people out of your life. Life is not going to be what you choose when you've got toxic people in. In fact, toxic people only demonstrate, if we see toxic people, only demonstrate what we don't understand about ourselves. And that toxic person, as you may identify them, they don't need to be your partner, they don't need to be friends, they don't need to be your bedfellow. But the thing is, to try and escape them is an illusion. You're only going to find another. There's a lesson there waiting for us to understand in that individual. What we need to cultivate within ourselves is a strength to be able to look at and confront that very darkness, that very disgust, long enough to be able to understand it, because then we understand ourselves. For so many of us, we're looking to get into the red or the blue, or the right or the wrong, or the black or the white camp. And we want to gather our troops against the others, thinking that we're peaceful warriors, but we're no different. Until we start to find our own truth and become accepting of everything around us, and we start to engage the power that does exist. But to do that, we have to accept our own significance. And to accept our own significance, we need to start to recognize that if we are infinite, and if we are truly capable, and you want to believe that and not just say it, well, you would embrace the very frequencies into your life, because you would trust in the capacity and the structure that you've created internally, energetically, through a deep understanding of yourself. So there's these ideas at the moment, and one of the conspiracies about 5G, that it's this terrible frequency that's going to floor people, and possibly it is. Possibly it's worse than that. But as individuals, we have an opportunity to rise above that, because adversity is going to continue to keep coming. So we've got an opportunity to go, well, that's terrible, and I hope it doesn't happen to me. Or we've got the opportunity to go, you know what? Fuck. That's just showing me that the fear that's coming up, the uncertainty that's coming up in me is just highlighting to me that I don't know how to maintain ease and sovereignty and independence in the presence of that frequency. So now would be the time to start learning that. Now would be the time to say, I don't know, so that then I can start my journey of learning. Because it's when we suggest I don't know that we then become open to all the information, which in time, if we've developed the ability to discern and be able to tap into a wisdom that we've all got capacity to be able to find our own truth, well, then we can find and define our pathway to rise above that. Because to me, I've been toxified by a whole range of things. And this is the very nature that when we start to believe in frequencies in our own elevation, we also become susceptible to them. We become responsible to need to rise above them. when we become consciously aware of things that are great, we're also equally exposed to things that are not so great. And some of us are under the illusion that as we start to enliven, as we start to engage, we wonder where all this pain and suffering is coming from. But this pain and suffering comes to us, to move through us, to be released. And I want to explain, this is a very important thing. The largest and probably the most least spoken about, and probably sometimes it's the most obvious one, but the least sexy might be our skin. It's the biggest organ that we possess. And it's through our skin that we detox, but it's also that we ingest and that we bring in. So as individuals, when we have something that we're looking to release and to create our own free will, we have to let go of all the things that we've held onto in life, and those times where our mind has become the chairman, where our mind has become the focus or the director of our life because we've separated from our very own truth, our own integrated state. And what we've taken on at that time becomes our beliefs, and they become within us. They're toxic. They're thoughts that I'm not good enough, that I won't make it, that I'm going to fail, that life is not working my way, that people think I'm weird, whatever it may be. And the thing is, in life, as we start to evolve and grow and we start to feel good and enlivened within ourselves and we start to sustain ourselves, what happens naturally in a healthy and sustained body is it starts to detox. Now, our body, when it is stressed and under stress, it is not going to detox. It may eventually, if it's maintained that stress, it will die. And at its last gasp, try to release toxins from our skin. And I don't just mean ingested toxins that might be chemical or biologically based. I mean things that are more significant, energetically based, the thoughts, the beliefs that we hold on to. And you see, when we're releasing them, our ability to master ourselves is the ability to observe those things releasing and for us to re-experience and re-feel how inadequate, how uncomfortable, how vulnerable we are, how limited we are. And to observe that and know that that detox and that toxic release and that process that's going through as it passes back through our skin, it's not who we are. It's not what we are. It's what we were and it's what we're now letting go of. And if we understand that, we maintain patience, we maintain presence to allow it to happen. But we have to develop those skills. And this is the same way that if we were having a juice fast and we knew we were having a juice fast and we knew through that juice fast and the purging of our own self, that we were going to be nauseous, that we were going to be sick, that we might have diarrhea, that we might vomit. We might not like it when it happens when we start that juice fast a couple of days later, but what we start to recognize and we start to accept and become at ease with is this is a part of it. Hey, this thing's working. Hey, I feel like shit, but this thing's working. And at the end of it, we feel great. Energetically, we don't understand how to do that. And that's what defines and limits our own free will because we become so toxic. We're holding on to other people's beliefs, other people's ideas, and we're prioritizing them above our own. And it's that very thing that confuses us, that keeps us in doubt and does not allow us to express our own free will, because as we start to act, we are confounded by the many voices and many beliefs that are contradictory on how we want to live our life, and we get confused by that. Why can't it just be easier for me? Why? How come it's easier for him and not for me? This is about recognizing that, in the confrontation of our own darkness and our willingness to do that, that we become free. There's nothing to fix. There's nothing to heal. Everything exists brilliantly and perfectly. I mean, consider to yourself, if everything is perfect, why am I experiencing this? And start to look from the fact that everything is in order. Everything is brilliant, and I am as well. But if that is the case, and I accept that, well, why is it that I'm currently experiencing this? Because it's obviously something I don't understand, which I have the capacity to. But if I don't give myself the choice to, and I automatically assume that I'm broken and that I need fixing and that I need healing, I'm going to go and need to read a book about certain nutrients. I'm going to need to read someone else's opinion. I'm going to need to follow someone else's thoughts rather than, and look and trial and error and read 400 or 500 pages to find out one insight, rather than having the capacity to be able to identify which book to read, what page, and then find the information that you need so you can operate at a higher capacity rather than not. And to me, free will comes in each particular moment that we choose to do something beyond what we are. And it's this very nature of, fantastical and theoretical infiniteness if we were infinite, nothing could harm us. Nothing would exist that has impact or effect upon us. But are we prepared to say that we're infinite because it sounds cool? Because it's going to sell me a program, or it's going to make people think that I know what I'm on about? Or am I able to demonstrate that by bringing in the most hideous frequency into my being? First of all, knowing that I can do that, but bring it to myself so that I can elevate myself. And like the very nature of, which might not be popular to some people, the nature of inoculation and vaccines was to introduce things slowly into our own space in order for us to build a resilience and a strength beyond that. That just doesn't happen at a physical level. That happens at an energetic level. And we've got to stop buying into the ignorance that exists, that people are out to get us. Yes, certain people that are in control right now might have a different agenda, but that just gives us the impetus to go, well, fuck, get in control yourself. There's an example. You don't need to follow who's in control, but if you can take the example of people who are in control and you don't like the way they do things, you have the opportunity to change that. Or you can sit and complain and diminish the very nature of your own free will to change something. I saw something the other day about the guy who owns Amazon. I'm not sure of his name, but Jeff
Bezos.
Jeff Bezos. Yeah, that's right. And I had a bit of a laugh because it said, don't kid yourself. Don't fool yourself that you're going to become the next Jeff Bezos. If you're thinking that that's what is going to become of your life, that you're going to become a 70 billion, whatever it was, billionaire and live a life in this particular way, you've got a 0.00001% chance. But just remember, it's the same percentage that he had. Now, some people might go, yeah, but he's supported, and all these other theories, because they don't like to believe that people have a capacity to create their own environment. They want to buy into the fact that they don't, but yet they want to aspire to things that I'm infinite. And I can take this shortcut where I can get energy instead of pharmaceuticals, because it's just the same guys. It's just under a different idea in the tribe that I'm in that I believe to be right, rather than confronting the very significance within their own selves and working across the entirety of that space. We need to take responsibility for ourselves. And when we take responsibility for ourselves and find our own truth, then we can start to approach free will. And from free will, we can find what I would say independence, where we can start to make choices and become responsible for those choices and the impacts of those choices. And through independence, we release the responsibility that we have created, that I'm responsible for how someone else feels. I'm responsible for how someone else acts. You are not. You're responsible for yourself. You're responsible for the example that you provide to yourself, and how whatever other people choose to do with that, that is their choice. You're responsible for how you respond to the way that they feel. That's up to you, and that's for your truth. But when we can maintain that over a period of time, then we might be able to approach something called sovereignty, where we become completely independent and operate independently of what was. And to me, sovereignty is elevation and death and ascension. It's beyond this particular space. But this is the very nature that people use these ideas that I'm sovereign, I'm going to be like, you're not sovereign, you're approaching it, you're moving towards it. This is the very nature of our own ideas of marketing and wanting to capture people's attention to promise well beyond what we can deliver. The very nature and what I would suggest the simplicity of what is there and what's going to last in the longer term is what's important. And to identify, am I capable to create the life that I want? And if I'm not, well, how would I come to a point of doing that? For me, it's very, very, very simple to get to that particular point of getting to that stage. What's difficult is once you have the capacities, once you have the skills, to then start actioning, because that's when your truth gets confronted. That's when courage is truly required, when you cannot deny what's in front of you, when you cannot deny the truth of it, the observation of it, and it's only now up to you to step into it. There's a guy that both you and I know that I suppose both love, named Brett, who did some work some time ago, and he's got a great sense of humor, but called me one time and said to me in regards to finding his own awareness is, how the fuck do I turn this thing off? And for him, it was laughing, but it was also a challenge, because he started to see things in his life that he didn't want, that he hadn't taken responsibility for, but then realized he couldn't deny because he'd found his own truth. And that was his gift, for him to be able to discover that. And that to me is what free will is all about. the ability to be able to see the things in your life that you've avoided, that you have not wanted to acknowledge, that you've denied consistently and regularly, but you've now developed a capacity to be able to sit with them, to be present to them, in order to have the capacity to change them. And that is your free will to recognize and align with the choice to do so. Or equally, the choice to not do so.
Yeah, I like it. I like what you've created there, which is a distinction around, regardless of the notion of sovereignty being something that could exist like outside of you, when we free ourselves up from any contamination, any misunderstandings, anything that's getting in the way of us, it's like an internal cleanse, which cleanses the system, which allows it to operate, function more in alignment with whatever our truth is, regardless of not whether or not that might be predetermined or not. It's a function of cleansing the system. So I like that. It kind of simplifies it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's look, I saw something recently with all, a number of discussions going on, and something was the very nature of a virus, for example, is the purging of the cells. And to me, I find that so interesting in that understanding, because by default, my very experience with all forms of disease is it is simply a releasing and a letting go and a purging. And for many of us in life, we, it's all well and good and easy to let go of that person you don't like, you don't want in your life anyway. But it's very difficult to be able to hear in yourself to let go of things that we value. And that is the making of an individual, was when they can get to a particular point without disgust, without judgment, without aggression, be able to let go of the things that they love in their life. And knowingly, those people that they do let go of, or those situations or circumstances, teams or whatever it is, they realize that there may be a reaction and judgment that comes, but they allow themselves to follow courageously down that pathway, which they've got no fucking idea where it's actually taking them. And that's another level of its own free will, but it's the purging of what it is that was once valuable to us that really defines our ability to find our own success and our own expression, rather than our own victimhood. As far as one of the greatest conditions that we can get above at this particular point is above blame. We so freely give blame, and I look at it, if blame was just not an option, that when blame happened, we started twitching because we had some, electrical impulse going through us. It was, we went to blame, and it was like, look, we'd have to find a different solution. And what could we find in that same space? That as we went to blame someone because we didn't understand it, because they did wrong by me, because they left me, they cheated on me, they whatever. If we didn't have the option to do that, and we had to find how that was true or what the relevance of that was to us. But you've got to understand they did this and they did it intentionally, and they did. Yeah, okay. We can sit there for the rest of our lives going on about that, but what is going to change? You're going to sit there waiting and holding on to this, and you're going to be changed by life, and you're going to do so in a rigid form, creating disease, creating deterioration in your life. Then you're going to complain that you've got cancer. Then you're going to complain that you've got whatever other disease, because of this shit that you're not prepared to let go of, because you're sitting there holding on to blame, which keeps you stuck in one spot. When we don't blame someone, we naturally move forward. And the notions of what people talk about is the woo-wee, or the flow, is about our ability to move forward without resistance, but in the understanding and the acceptance that resistance is going to come, and I'm ready for it. That's, I think, flow is, too many people have that fantasy idea that it's just going to flow, it's just going to all work out. But they're completely absent of the fact that that flow occurs to the degree that we're prepared to overcome our resistance, and how quickly and how fast we can do that in the acceptance of what it is that defines us. We have flow. As a result, we don't get flow. We don't seek flow. It is a default response from releasing the things that have been holding us back, like weights in our life.
Yeah, and I like that flow is something that we experience because of things that we've let go, or because of resilience that we've built up. Like, you can't expect to master anything or be in flow the first time you've done it. So there is a level of releasing resistance, but also mastery of something in order to actually access that state.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's kind of, rather than it being a destination or an elevator that you suddenly get out at, and I've now made it, which is another big part of the illusion, that when I get there and when this happens and once I've achieved that, like some sort of destination, it's a continual practice of it. It's people I know with my work, they come and say, well, how did the fucking ego, how do I get rid of the ego, how do I get rid of these thoughts, how to embrace them? Like if you have your greatest darkness coming towards you, you reach out and you hug it, it's no longer your greatest darkness or your enemy. And eventually it might wiggle and squirm and it might hit you in the guts whilst you're doing it. But if you hold on and you maintain your own full embracing of recognizing that those hits in the guts and those, wriggles and those resistances are part of it. Too often we go to make advances in our lives after the things we want, and we get a small little rejection. We step away and go, no, didn't work. Oh, they looked at me in a different way. No, I don't think they like me. Yeah, for sure. And that may be a truth and that may be a condition, but eventually we can get to a point after doing that a number of times. I know I did. I was desperately shy and desperately restricted in my life for many, many years, and would approach people and things that I wanted only under the influence of either a motivation of a lack of something or being full of something, and either way, I was not being myself. I was either driven by fear or filled with other ingredients. And, that didn't form a sustainable path for me.
Chase, I'd love to touch back on, we covered things like, 5G and pharmaceuticals, and there's all sorts of external influences, whether it be physical, chemical, electromagnetic, as well as just other people. So I'd love to hear your take on how much of our environment is actually tangibly affecting us. Because we're familiar with the placebo effect, which is if you believe in something, it will heal you. There's also the nocebo effect, which is the opposite of that. If you buy into something, then that'll have an impact on you. What's your take on? There's got to be a balance somewhere. Like, for example, if you're eating heavy metals or poisons and putting that into your body, that's going to have some impact. And at the same time, yes, what you believe about it also has an impact. So, what's your take on balancing not living life with our head in the sand and doing our best to create the greatest environmental conditions for us to thrive, versus at the same time not buying into the next news article that we read about 5G, and then all of a sudden now we're believing it, it's now impacting us. So how do we know what's true, and how do we approach that so that we're not deluding ourselves, but at the same time we're also nurturing ourselves?
Okay, great. So I'll share probably my own experience on this and give a little bit of context to it. I've over the years been pressured, I suppose, and at times dropped into a particular situations which I felt were way beyond my capacity, and a lot of that was to do with people's different situations in their life. And I made it really clear that I didn't understand what would happen, but I believed that there was something that could be done. And over that time, there was an observation where all sorts of terminal conditions, and I don't mean just disease-based, I mean people's patterns that they were living in their life through relationships and any experiences, but in a more tangible way, those diseases. And going through a particular process of allowing people to overcome things in ways that I've never seen before, that was unexplained from a scientific perspective. I believe that within myself, but it felt crazy to do it out loud. And over time, a greater confidence was there, but the same things existed each time. So I believe in what I've developed and cultivated within myself is a certainty and an understanding in my beliefs. And this is, please, when anyone's listening to this, this is not, I'm suggesting I don't know, and because of that, I'm learning, and because of that, I developed a strength within myself to determine that. So what I'm saying is from my experience. So I've seen the spaces where people are able to bring frequencies into their environment and change the very nature of the way in which they biologically operate. Now, there's a whole range of ways to identify and work with that, and it can, can go on forever. But I'm very confident that whatever frequency may exist, that I have the capacity to overcome, that I have the capacity to protect myself from, that I have the capacity to possibly be infected by, overcome by, but it is a trigger within my own self to develop a greater level of awareness within me. So, for example, 5G and hearing about it, and I heard about it, my first response was, well, yeah, okay, interesting. And I listened to either side, people saying that it was ineffectual and just great technology, and others talking about how it's 60 gigahertz and that very much stops the heart and blood and oxygen in the body, and it can drop people to the ground, to the fact it's had no testing supposedly, and all of these other things that sound dire and dastardly and conspiratorial. And I at first was okay, I was confident in myself, but my own intrigue caused me to look deeper and further into it, and it did bring about a level of my own restrictions of like, fuck, what if and what happens, and started to get caught up in everyone else and what was going on and how this could be the end. And I found myself falling into that. But one thing that I've developed in my own life is I don't like to be imprisoned by what other people tell me. So over the years, I've developed a way of moving beyond that and finding my own truth and finding understanding. So I was confronted with that in my own self, but it would only have maintained and become a problem and a fear in my life if I wasn't able to discern and go into myself to find my own truth, which brought about, again, then a state of ease. And I believe by doing that, I've elevated myself to a greater level of understanding. Now, the thing is, I believe, and don't just say it, I believe that everything exists to support me, that everything exists for my benefit. And I would suggest that any terrible thing that happens to each of us in all of our lives, we'll fight against it. And some people will go to the grave fighting against a cause. And they'll be contorted and they'll be affected by it, and some will be inspired by it. But when we fight against something and we don't understand it, we'll become affected by it. But when we can start to recognize that in our life, the things that have been most traumatic, most tragic, most heartbreaking, we have always come through them. We have always elevated beyond them to whatever degree. And we become released and enlivened, whatever it may be, from them by understanding the very nature of them. We understand maybe in later years the nature of our parents and what they went through and why they were the way they were to us, that we've been holding on to for 20 years because we now understand it. And it comes in a moment, and it's like, in that understanding, we're released. We're freed. And what I suggest by 5G, by pharmaceuticals, by vaccines even, and some ID chip that might even be mandated, is if you're in fear of that, it's about recognizing within yourself that fear and then stimulating yourself to such a degree to become free from it, till there is no longer any fear, but to recognize that in a week's time or a month's time, that fear may arise again, but what that is something toxic within you that you've been holding on to as a belief and idea that wants to release. But if we fight against it and suppress it, we push it back in. And as we push it back in, it becomes more toxic. And then the next time it arises as a bigger thought, as a bigger interaction in our life, a bigger interruption, we have to use more force to push it and hold it within. And eventually we become defined by it, we become toxic by it. And some people create a cause because that thing that they're holding onto, that they're suppressing, has such an influence over their life that their identity, their truth has been lost. So I don't buy into the idea that, and for me, that there is some horrific things. I can get shot. I can have, a whole range of things in my life. But to me, this could be, a confronting thing for many of us. is I choose to live my life that if I was to die tomorrow, I'd die tomorrow. And if I did, am I happy at this particular point with what I've produced, what I've created, what I've offered? Have I done all the things that I want? You know, because I look at, you know, things like funerals and people dying and all this fear of their loved ones dying. Well, you know, people grieve and maintain their grief to the degree that they don't maintain authenticity or present their authenticity to those people around them. If we are true to ourselves and we live every moment as if it was the last time that we were going to see someone, again, we would have, like the blame thing in the electric charge, if that was incumbent upon us to live as if it was our last meeting, as if we were to complete, we wouldn't leave an arrangement, a conversation half finished. We'd be focused, we'd be complete, we'd be present. We become lazy and compliant, which then allows our immune systems to be compromised, allows our defenses to be compromised, allows our wisdom to be compromised, so that we do become affected by these things around us. We can become indoctrinated by so many other people's ideas, opinions, and information, or we can start to recognize that there is something that we're gifted inside ourselves and learn to navigate how to do that. Because we've all had experiences that are a little bit different. They're a little bit strange. And if we think for 1 second that we understand it, and that this thing that, you know, look, of all the technology that exists, no one still can define what exists within us. People have got some theories, some people have some success with it, and that's great. But are we here to understand it, or are we here to experience it? And a part of our own life becomes in our own opportunity to explore that. So for me, 5G, the World Health Organization, whatever other conspiracy is out there, whatever other thing, whether it's true or not, is irrelevant, because it's the things you're probably not seeing that are far worse than what you've been exposed to. If something was so organized and sinister, and it was for the undoing of you, yes, there's theories to show, well, put it in plain sight and people become desensitized to it. But there's also a whole range of things that are not being shown because it may be too much to consider. I don't know if you remember, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, Facebook did this thing where they had facial recognition. This was probably longer, 7 years ago. And you would take a photo of someone. And as you were taking a photo of someone, it would pop up immediately to say, do you want to send this to Joe Williams? Or do you want to send this to Paul Smith? Or do you want to send this? And it was this amazing facial recognition technology. And the fear that came with it and what people recognize, well, how the hell does it know that I'm actually, just by taking a photo of this person, that's them and that they're a friend of mine? There was an uproar and fear, and so Facebook rolled back that technology. I would suggest that we're only being shown what we're prepared to accept. And you know, here's another consideration. I'm not saying I agree with it, but we need to pop ourselves out of our own bubble occasionally. Bill Gates has become, you know, a poster boy for the opposition at the moment of free will and anti-vax and every other movement that's out there. And you know what? Maybe if it was in a court of law, maybe he'd be founded to be, you know, unconscionable in a range of different ways. But Bill Gates, whatever he does, he believes in that in his way. And for us to get caught up and affected by that is our own disillusion. What if Bill Gates, and no one can deny that this is true anyway, but it's a consideration to pop ourselves out of our own thinking. What if Bill Gates was the most enlightened, most aware individual that existed? What if he was aware of what it took for people to enlighten themselves? And what if he was providing such a challenge to people to get past their fears, their doubts and uncertainties and rise above whatever impact that he could have upon your life? What if he was the very teacher and he was aware that in his own humility, that he, as an individual, was going to cop flack, was going to be demonized, was going to be attacked in a whole range of various ways? But he had such a resilience within him that he was able to maintain that, and he was so evolved in his own way that he became the greatest teacher to many because they learned to overcome and free themselves from whatever it was that he represented. You see, the thing is, to even consider that, most people are going to say, that's fucking crazy. You don't know what you're talking about. How could you even consider that? Do you know how bad he is? Do you know this? all third, fourth, fifth hand, sixth hand information based upon supposed people that they trust. No one knows whether they're being convinced or consumed or manipulated by who. So my suggestion is to find out what's true within yourself, and to find it out with such strength and such understanding that you can go beyond whatever other person's influence or information is, so that once you actually can do that, you can then start to approach life and listen and not be influenced in the same time that you're listening. Listen to people, hear what's there, but then recognize as your own responsibility, as your own state of personal governance, that you can step aside and go, well, that's really interesting. Not he's an arsehole, or they're amazing, or they're bad, or they support me, or they're not, and then color what they're saying, but to be able to hear in anyone's expression, anyone's wisdom, a truth as it relates to you. To not become compromised by putting on a particular jumper and wearing a particular color because you want to be accepted by other people to the degree you haven't allowed yourself to be accepted by you. And this is what will challenge most people. How long can you sit in that particular space, go through and down that corridor of the things that you hate, that you don't like, that you detest, and actually start to look for wisdom in it, look for truth in it, to build such a resilience within yourself that you become unaffected by that. I would say that what I'm suggesting is not for everyone, but it's for people who want to lead, it's for people who want to be different, it's for people who want to grow, and people that don't want to be in prison. And look, all power to the people that want to be in prison, because I would suggest to you, in another way of looking at things, is that we manifest in ways that we don't even understand, and we are significantly capable. That there's not some process that we need to go through to manifest, that we can define our own organization. When we can trust ourselves, we can teach ourselves, because we can start to ask our own wisdom on how we would do things, how we would evolve, how we would grow. And the whole very nature of all forms of teaching is about creating independence. But that has been lost in time. People are now teaching in order to create communities, to create dependence. And this is the very structure. If you're in a community and you'll start looking at, I'm following this person, look how dependent, how reliant, and how weak you may have become in the nature of that thing. But they're all good people, but they're all, your strength and your capacity as individuals to create genuine community is in the ability to be independent, to be able to accept everyone for what they are, to bring in that different fabric. Now that will challenge some people, but the very nature of what I'm about to suggest is that as a manifestation, I would suggest in some form, because of such things as suicides, which is something we can measure, mental health, which people are blaming on all sorts of things at the moment, they've become identified, it's always been there. All sorts of aspects of life, people are imprisoned in the way that they don't express themselves. Now, you and I suppose, Chris, both know and have experienced the power that comes from openly expressing yourself. There's a very big difference between purging and just letting go of your shit, compared to being vulnerable enough to not know what's coming next. And there's a very big difference in the nature of these, life and sharing circles and empowerment of men and women that's going on a lot these days, between expression, which is the releasing and the letting go of things, and vulnerability, which is not knowing what's coming next and stepping into and approaching the very words that become your brilliance. I would suggest that majority of people are in prison. Not in prison by anything else, but not knowing themselves and allowing other people to tell them what they are, because they don't understand themselves. That their free will and their freedom comes from the ability to be able to define and understand what they are. Not who they are in relation to others, but what they are. And I would suggest that people have manifested from that imprisonment a willing imprisonment. I would look deeper and further to suggest that a government, an organised government, may have brought about measures to bring about stopping people being close to each other during these times. I mean, the evidence about this thing being infectious is irrelevant. It's insignificant. That the figures don't need to be looked at to question that. But what I'm suggesting is that at a deep level, and recognizing and understanding the fact that everything's here to support you and that everything exists to bring understanding to you, is this very one thing. We have manifested our own imprisonment. The thing is, how do we use it? How do you use this particular space? How do you respond to it? How do you react to it? How do you elevate yourself above it? How do you become your own truth? And that is what, to me, is most important, because of every conspiracy theory. I mean, in Australia, we had the fires recently, which was a crisis that everyone suddenly became an expert on what caused a fire. People wait until there's a crisis before they express themselves, and they do so in a way that becomes horrific, and then they end up fighting away the reputation they've created by the reaction from that space. I mean, for most of us, we're in a state where everything's working great. We dig a hole, we ignore our own intuition, our own insights, until we're in such a hole that we can't anymore. We decide to escape that place, and then as we escape it, we celebrate getting out of the hole that we dug, and we can repeat that again and again. We go through a cycle of pain and relief, and we continue to keep telling other people how great we are and what we've done, only to dig out of the hole that we create. That becomes part of the issue, that if we can start to change and do one thing, and we can start to make choices before we have to, before we should, when we're actually inspired. If we can make choices, and this is an easy thing to suggest, but it's a desperately difficult thing to do because of the nature of how we've imprisoned our own creativity and capacity to discern and make decisions into an unknown space. So, for example, when things are going great in our own life, when we are free and when things couldn't be better, most people celebrate because they're confused at how they actually got there. They don't know what to do next. So there's a celebration that occurs, and a telling of people of how they got there and the amazing things that occurred, and interviews and an expansion of this thing that they created. Success is a continuation of from one amazingly enlightened space to the next from that same space. But what most of us do in the chasing of success is we wait until we're under the most pressure, when we're in most dire situation, when there's the greatest crisis, when we start to consider our own destruction. And then we start to seek and want help, and we start to bring attention to ourselves from ourselves that we've got to change things. And we start to accept sympathy from others, compassion from others that we haven't accepted before. We never ask for help when we're at the top. We are only seeking it when we're at the bottom, just to escape the pain that we're in, that we created. And if we start to recognize that we are the creators of our own pain, we can start to rise above it. If we can start to recognize that by not choosing to evolve, we're choosing to destruct, destroy. Then when we get that, then we can start to make choices and intersect life, because it's a very simple process that when we are in, and we've got to get past this state of guilt, when we are in this heightened state of being, when everything is inspired and we're moving there, and that hasn't happened by mistake. That takes a lot of hard work. That takes a lot of commitment. That takes a lot of sacrifice, and whatever it is, for the first time a person gets to that particular point in their life. It doesn't happen by mistake. It happens by a concerted and a consistent effort towards something that's worthy for them to be able to get past those things that have challenged them and distracted them previously. But once they actually get there, to be able to stay there, things happen simply and easily, and people can't believe how simply that's happening, to such a point where they start to go, oh, I don't know how long this is going to last. So something has to go wrong sooner or later. And by their own manifestation, they stop doing those very things because they're fearful of losing the very thing that they've created and the value now that's now important to them, that wasn't important to before, and they become imprisoned by the thing they've created. Rather than being able to let go of it and see the evidence that they create something more beyond that. And this is just about a point where we meet life and where we intersect and where we make decisions. Do we wait until we're disempowered? Do we wait until, like, people complaining about, you know, how terrible this thing may have got? It didn't just happen in the last 3 or 4 months. This has been going on for your entire lifetime. When do you choose to change that? The best time would be now. And this is a very, you know, significant part of when things are going great for us, we get confronted by our own guilt, because every time we make a decision from that inspired, from that clarified space, it improves, and it continues to improve. But in doing so, we may leave friends behind. We may leave situations behind. We may leave endeared moments, memories behind. And for some of us, we're not prepared to do that in the pursuit of our own truth. We're fearful of what may become of us when we start to become alone, or what I would say, all one. And that we do is we create dramas, we create traumas so that we can solve the problem, so we can seem valuable, so we can bring in love and attention from others, because we don't know how to love ourselves when we've achieved something of great significance, because most people at that point are judging us because of we're not acknowledging them, we've left them behind in some way. And that's why I would suggest the path to your own truth is not easy. It's not simple. It requires a significant amount of courage, and you have to let go of the fucking stories that you've been telling yourself and the identifications that you've been holding on to. And this always comes down to one thing, is the how to. And that's what has driven my life. I got sick of going and seeing spruikers and speakers telling me the same thing, which was great about trust yourself. And talking, yeah, but how the fuck do you trust yourself? How do you become confident? What is the process? And, you know, trying to copy them, model them, and all the while denying myself. We've got to find a way within our own selves, which is, you know, the very nature of confronting and letting go of, which I would say is the greatest challenge for all of us, is letting go of the things that we find valuable. Anyone can let go of the shit. But it's our ability to grow is determined by how willingly we trust ourselves by letting go of the most valuable things in our lives, because we know we're only going to recreate them. We need to move past the victimhood that we've all been buying into, the compassion and the sympathy for others who suddenly find themselves in pain. They didn't suddenly find themselves there. We are not the result of other people's choices, but we can be if we want to be. We can become the result of what other people choose for us, through us, to us, or otherwise we can start to find courage and do so for our own self.
Yeah, and you just touched on courage there, Jace. I know we've only got a few minutes left, but I'd love to know your take on in terms of growing and moving forward. One opportunity is just having incredible courage and just keep making a conscious choice to keep moving forward, even in the space of the unknown, even under potential judgment and ridicule. Courage alone can keep you moving forward. There is the other aspect of, or the other side of the coin as well, which is, I don't have courage yet, so I'm going to purge or release any limitations or belief systems so that now I don't need as much courage. So I'd love to know your take on what's your approach to potentially favoring one of those over the other.
Yeah, thanks. So there's a lot of the thing is with courage, for me, it's doing what I haven't done, what's unfamiliar. And the very nature of growth is to do what's not familiar to me, to do what I've never done before. You know, I used to have this thing where I'd have a challenge of the week, and it would be to do something that would bring up so much fear, but I learned to overcome it. There's nothing to fear. It's just our reactions to it, and they become a habit. So courage, you know, is about doing what we haven't done, recognizing we're probably going to fail, accepting that. You know, there's a thing in life that no matter what we do, we're going to piss people off. We might as well piss people off on the way to what it is that is so worthy and true to us, which means that we have to find a responsibility to define what it is that we're prepared to pursue, uncover, and become in order to deal with all the people that we've pissed off. Now, whether you like it or not, you're going to be judged. That's not upon you, that's upon the others. It only becomes an issue to you when you stop to listen. You see, when we're so engaged in what we're doing and we start to recognize that we are enjoying what we're doing, judgments are irrelevant. Judgments only become a condition in our life and a thing to fight against because we're not actually engaged in our own self. And we've got to take responsibility for that. Stop going, yeah, but that was a bad thing, or that person wasn't nice, or that wasn't good. What we need to look at is simply the fact it is going to happen. We need to find something that's worthy enough in our own life that we want to pursue in order to do that. And for me, for the record, I've got no problem with judgment. I think judgment is essential. As individuals, we need to be able to express our judgment to find our own truth. The issue with judgment, like anything, is if we stay stuck in it, if we stop, if we don't move forward. If we continue to judge that person for who they were, the situation for what it was, and not become present to the moment, judgment becomes a very difficult and heavy burden to bear and to carry. And that becomes the very nature of our own discord, our own unimmunity, our own susceptibility to life and the conditions that may present to us. So for me, courage is about being prepared to be unpopular. You're not doing things to be unpopular, but you know it's going to happen. You know, you can suggest and say things and express yourself in a way that is unique and independent. And that's, to me, like, it's about awakening independence. It's about educating ourselves so that I don't need people around me. So I don't require that individual to love me, to complete me, to fulfill me. But it's recognizing that if I can fulfill and sustain myself, that's when I can truly share. And, you know, there's a great saying that I love, and it's by John D. Martini, that, and it might not great word for word, but, you know, that when you love someone for exactly who they are, well, then they become exactly who you love. And the very nature of that is that when you see them for who they are, you see them for who they are because you're not projecting, requiring, or needing them to fulfill you, to sustain you, to support you. You've taken that responsibility because you're the only one that can. You know, and it's the, you know, the greatest challenges that we have in our own life, if we don't accept the responsibility for them, whether they happen to us, whether it was forced upon us, whether it was our environment, and talking about, you know, people in devastating places where that's relevant to them. Yes, it might be different to us, and you can get caught up in the empathy or the sympathy of it, but that is their path. And the very nature of that for us as individuals is to understand and recognize our own and provide an example that enables other people to find their own liberty. You know, and we start to love and appreciate other people to the degree that we do so for ourselves. If we have someone that loves us more than we love ourselves, we call them smothering. If we have someone that doesn't love us enough, we call them absent. You know, and we tend to chase after, ironically, the ones that we think are absent rather than the ones that we think are smothering. To understand from those people that are smothering why it is they love us in ways that we don't yet understand how to love our own self. It's an interesting process in how we push those people away that love us more. You know, and sometimes it's our parents, sometimes it's our partner where we're most disgusting to them and what we say in our own tone, because we're not yet ready to appreciate the love that they see within us that we haven't yet accepted in our own self. It's why we get along so much with people that we don't know so well, because they don't know much about us, and we can create and be whatever we want in that particular space. But when we still judge ourselves for what we did or have not done, or who we've become in the presence of our parents, you know, we become denying of the very love that is eternal, that exists all around us all the time, that we can start to see not just in our parents, but in everyone. It just happens to be a little bit different to the way that we may have wanted or expected or thought that it should be.
Nicely said, Jace.
Thanks, man. Thank you.
Yeah, well, great conversation. Well, that's all we've got time for today. Thanks so much, Jace. That was pretty deep. That was great. Yeah, much appreciated. Thanks again.
Thanks, Chris. I love it, and really appreciate it. Feel like we've just started, but thank you very much, and yeah, I hope it's been of benefit.
Yeah, it has. Thanks, mate. Looking forward to chatting again soon.
Right. Thanks, Chris.